Hey guys, so today we're continuing on talking about ecosystems. This lesson we're going to talk about different types of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Some of this will overlap with stuff that you learned last year about biomes, but there's definitely some new stuff in here as well. So for this lesson on terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, you once again need to know the different biomes of Canada and what a biome is. Then we're going to compare different terrestrial ecosystems, so the taiga, the grasslands, and the deciduous forests, which are all both biomes and ecosystems, as well as the muskeg. Then we're going to talk about how some of those ecosystems have different zones within them. And then we're also going to look at how that differs from an aquatic ecosystem. So a biome is a geographical area with a specific temperature and precipitation range, and where the organisms that live in that area are adapted to the environmental conditions. The reason why we need them to be adapted to the environmental conditions is because it tells us that that temperature and precipitation range has been the same for a while, that it's not just a weather pattern, but a climate of that area. Biomes tend to be defined both by their temperature and precipitation, as well as what the dominant species in that area is, which is just like the most common species. Biomes do contain numerous ecosystems within them. If you remember, the ecosystem is the building block for the biosphere. And then biomes are just kind of like large chunks of the biosphere. Each individual ecosystem is defined by its local biotic and abiotic factors, and some ecosystems will contain organisms not found in the rest of the biome, so it may have its own specific dominant species. We have 4 terrestrial biomes here in Canada: the tundra, which is the Arctic region, very cold, very low precipitation, very low insolation, which is another term for solar radiation, and very low biodiversity. Then we have the taiga, which it has more precipitation and is a bit warmer than the tundra. It has lots of coniferous trees. It's also called the boreal forest. That's the largest biome that we have here in Canada. Then the grassland, also low precipitation, a bit more than the tundra, but less than the taiga. It has very distinct seasons, very few trees, mostly because there's actually not enough precipitation to support large plant lives. It is mostly grass. We also call it the prairies here in Canada. And lastly, the temperate deciduous forest, which has a very moderate climate, also has distinct seasons, and its dominant species is the deciduous trees. When it comes to terrestrial ecosystems, we're talking about ecosystems that are on land and not covered in water, so not like ponds and stuff like that. We're going to be looking at different taiga ecosystems, grassland ecosystems, and deciduous forest ecosystems. The taiga ecosystems are a dominant type of ecosystem here in Canada. The taiga does make up about 80% of our forest, like we talked about already. The dominant species there is coniferous trees. Anything that lives there has to be adapted to a cold, dry winter and then a warm summer. The taiga is comprised of numerous ecosystems, each with organisms that are adapted to the local biotic and abiotic factors, which, as a reminder, are like the living and non-living factors in that area. Ecosystems here tend to have really acidic soil because of the decay of the coniferous tree needles. And then different ecosystems can occur at different geographical regions, kind of spread out. So for instance, like an area that is like, closer to the ocean is going to have different ecosystems than one that is closer to like the mountains or something like that. But you can also have different ecosystems occur at the same location, but at different heights. So instead of the ecosystems only occurring in 2-dimensional space, they occur in 3-dimensional space as well. 2 examples of that in the taiga are the forest floor ecosystem and the canopy ecosystem. So in the same area, but one ecosystem on the forest floor and one up in the canopy of the trees. The forest floor ecosystem is going to have abiotic and biotic factors like low sunlight, because the canopy is shading the ground. So it's going to have lots of small shade-loving plants. There's going to be a lot of detritus, which is like dead leaves and pine needles, and stuff like that. You're going to have larger predators down there. You're going to have prey species that are really well camouflaged. And then in the canopy ecosystem, there will be more sunlight, more bird species, small primary consumers that can feed on the trees, stuff like that. The muskeg ecosystem occurs within the taiga biome at the northern edges of the taiga, just where the tundra is about to start. These ecosystems are unique from the other ecosystems of the taiga because they have a layer of permafrost beneath the soil. And that just means it's a layer of like frozen ground that never melts, so permanent frost in the ground essentially. Rain and snow melt on the surface of the ground, and they cannot sink into the soil past the permafrost. So it just kind of soaks into all the decomposing plant matter, all the decomposing animals, the peat moss, and just kind of like sits kind of swampy on the top. This area does have less precipitation than the rest of the taiga because it's close to the tundra, but it does still end up very swampy in the summer because of all of that meltwater just sitting on the top of the permafrost. This area is able to support a lower density of large trees than the rest of the taiga because the usable soil is so shallow. So you can't have like big tree roots going like deep into the soil because they also can't get past the permafrost. The ground temperatures here are also kept much lower than the rest of the taiga in the summer because of the permafrost. So organic matter decomposes quite slowly here. They decompose slower the colder it is. So in the muskeg, they will decompose quite slowly. Because of that slow rate of decomposition, it means that soil forms very slowly because soil is made up of decomposing stuff. It also means that the soil has less organic matter in it, which just means that it doesn't have like as many nutrients and stuff available to plants that are trying to grow there. The swampy areas do support a lot of insects like mosquitoes and black flies though, so you'll see a lot more of those than you would in, say, the rest of the taiga. You will see a lot of low-lying plants and caribou in this area as well, which makes it distinct from other ecosystems in the taiga. Okay, then we move on to the grassland ecosystems, which are very distinct from the muskeg. These ones are super, super fertile. The soil has tons of nutrients in it. This ecosystem's dominant plant is grass, as the name suggests. And the grass has really, really deep roots, but they don't live very long. They tend to just live like a season or few. And so when those grasses die, the grass and then their super deep roots all break down, and it provides a lot of organic matter back to the soil. Also, because it's warmer than the taiga, it means that these roots and stuff like that decompose quite quickly. And so we have an ecosystem that has really fast forming, high quality soil. The low precipitation in the grassland does limit the types of plant life to just like shrubs and grasses and maybe a few trees. But it is very, very healthy soil. This ecosystem does just occur two-dimensionally, so it's all at one height because we don't have a lot of tall plant life and stuff like that. And like I said, grass is the dominant species. There will also, of course, be a lot of grass-eating herbivores as well as snakes, grasshoppers, that kind of stuff. Then we get to the deciduous forest ecosystems. These ecosystems have more sunlight. They have higher temperatures compared to the taiga and the muskeg ecosystem, so more insulation and higher temperatures. There's also more rain here than the taiga. and definitely more rain than the grassland, which means that we have a lot of large deciduous trees, and all of the leaves that fall off of those trees creates a really rich, healthy soil. You won't have as fast as a decomposition rate here, or as healthy of a soil as, say, the grassland, but it is definitely faster than the taiga or the muskeg. Here, ecosystems occur at 3 different heights, so we're back to ecosystems in 3-dimensional space, which increases the biodiversity of these areas above the other types of terrestrial ecosystems that we have in Canada. So the 3 different heights of ecosystems that we can get is, once again, the forest floor, which is just on the ground. Then we have the understory, which is beneath the branches of the tree, but above the forest floor, so kind of like on that trunk portion, like lower trunk portion. And then the canopy, which would be higher in the trees, which gets lots of sunlight and stuff like that. So this is just kind of describing it. The reason our taiga doesn't have an understory, it just has a canopy and a forest floor, is because with coniferous trees, you tend to not have a lot of space between the forest floor and the start of your branches. You have a lot more of that space usually with deciduous trees. Okay, so that is it for our terrestrial ecosystems. Let's move on to some aquatic ecosystems. So aquatic ecosystems are just ecosystems that occur in water. Water does cover 2/3 of the planet, is what that should say, not plants. Most aquatic ecosystems are saltwater ecosystems, so the oceans, since salt water makes up 97% of Earth's water. And oceans have thousands of different ecosystems because, I mean, they're so huge in size. They span all the way from the Arctic to the equator. They have a lot of depth in some areas. They're really shallow. They have reefs, that kind of stuff. The oceans do help regulate the climate here on Earth. They support the water cycle. They support a lot of biodiversity. But here in Alberta, obviously, we only have freshwater ecosystems found in lakes and ponds and streams and stuff like that, because we are not on a coast. So that's what our focus is going to be on. So for lake ecosystems, there is more of a variety of ecosystems than, say, ponds or streams, just because of the larger size of most lakes, and because of the variety of depth. So you do have a lot of variation of abiotic and biotic factors across just a single lake. So things like sunlight, temperature, oxygen levels can all vary greatly in a lake depending on depth, which is then going to affect what kind of organisms are found there. So all lakes, or most lakes I should say, if they're deep enough, are broken down into 3 different zones based on these abiotic factors. So these are what we use as kind of different categories of lake ecosystems. These are the zones of a lake. So the 3 different lake zones are the littoral zone, limnetic zone, and profundal zone. All lakes should have a littoral zone and a limnetic zone. Some aren't deep enough to have a profundal zone. So the littoral zone is the zone that goes from the shoreline out to a depth where aquatic plants are no longer rooted. So if we look at our diagram, the littoral zone goes all the way out until we no longer have any aquatic plants that are rooted to the lake bed. This is kind of characterized by having enough sunlight for photosynthesis to occur, and that's why those aquatic plants can live there. So it does contain a lot of aquatic plants, and then that provides food for different herbivores. It provides shelter for different like fish species and stuff like that. Then the limnetic zone is the zone on the surface of the lake where there's still enough light for photosynthesis, but where it's too deep for plants to grow. And so in this area, the dominant species are autotrophic plankton and heterotrophic plankton. So you could just say plankton in general, but it's essentially plankton that photosynthesize and plankton that eat other plankton. Both of these provide food sources to things like birds and tadpoles and fish and stuff like that. And this is an example of what plankton actually look like. So if we look back on our diagram, this is the limnetic zone over here. As you can see, there's no plant life, but there is still a lot of sunlight in this area. And then lastly, we have the profundal zone, which is found beneath the limnetic zone. It does only occur in lakes that are deep enough. And essentially the profundal zone is the zone where there's not enough light for any photosynthesis to happen. So it has to be deep enough that light can't really reach it very well. At this area of the lake, this zone, the only nutrients that you get are from dead organic matter that kind of falls down and is decomposing and stuff. So you have a lot of decomposers that live in the profundal zone. You also have what's called detritus feeders, which are bottom dwellers that eat dead things. The decomposers, which are usually bacteria, use up oxygen in the process of decomposing organic matter. So you do have very low oxygen levels in the profundal zone because there's no plants photosynthesizing, which would produce oxygen, and your decomposers are using up what little oxygen there is. So any other organisms that live in this area have to be able to tolerate both low light levels and low oxygen levels. Okay, and that is it for today's lesson. In the next one, we're going to be looking more in depth at some of the biotic and abiotic factors that affect different ecosystems.